We're back here in Adobe Illustrator CC 2018, and I've created from a sketch layer as my guide, I have created some points connected by paths using curves, Bezier curves. Again, Bezier curves, they consist of a path and a curve that is created through the use of these handles that are used to pull out from this path to generate this curve. So I mentioned thinking of it like a rubber band, as if this line right here is pulling up on the curve below. It's generating the curve. So watch, if I pull away like that, it's like a rubber band. It's pulling away. I'm gonna reset that. All right, so the last lesson we created this petal of the flower, this petal down here by using curves, and we learned that the direct selection tool, the standard pen tool here, and then the sub tool here, anchor point tool in CC 2018, it could be called the convert direction or convert anchor point or something like that in earlier versions. We learned that we can hold down modifier keys and use just those three. And those are the ones that you're going to use most of the time when you are generating vector-based artwork, paths and points. So let's take a look. I have sped up everything. And here we're looking at my finished artwork. So I've taken it up to here. I've got the circle drawn here. I did that really by just drawing an ellipse. So I went in and I took my tool and first drew a circle. Actually, you know what? I'll show you how I did it right now. Okay, so I'm going to delete that. I'm going to come back in here. I am going to begin to draw a circle. Now, if you hold down the Option and the Shift key, you can draw a circle from the center point of the circle. So what I want to do is I want to get it to just touch the left and the right in the lines of my sketch. And then holding down nothing, just my mouse button, I can drag these little handles, these points, and now I have the circle. So you don't always have to use the pen tool and the curves and all those things to create a simple oval. You can use the shape tools that are already provided to you in Adobe Illustrator to achieve those things. In fact, anytime you have a circle or a square, I encourage you to use those. If you have that in your design, use those tools first. See what you can get before you use things that are a little bit more time-consuming, really. So let's turn off our sketch and look at this. We have smooth curves. I'm going to show you what that looks like, all the handles. Now there are a lot of handles in here, and some people have spent years and years and years of practice and just working on it to reduce the number of handles, all right? But for instance, we have this right here. This corner is made up of a few handles. And in fact, we have the handles from this one down here, this corner, creating this part, and then this corner creating this part, these handles. So we may be getting down in the weeds here a little bit, but you can see how they're made up. We've dragged out these handles to achieve the curves that we needed to based on our sketch below. All right, the next thing I do is I take my design and these are all paths, but I want them to be shapes, just a shape because I'm working on a logo here, all right? So we used this really bright color, a color that would stand out to create just our paths, and I'll create a new layer for my next part of it. So what I'll do is I drag this down and I create a new layer, and you can see anytime you're copying a layer, it will just give you a plus sign down here in your layers panel. It's way down here in the bottom right. I'm gonna let go, and I've just made a points copy layer. All right. Now, the next thing I do is I lock off my original down here. I want to retain the original in case I ever need to go back and work on something. I want to have that available to me. So what I next do is I made this copy, I click on the eyeball for the original layer, and that will hide it. All right, so now I'm working on the copy. So I select with my selection tool, that's the black arrow tool, I drag over with my mouse, held down, my mouse button held down, and that will select everything. The very first thing I do is I go over here to where my colors were, or my line is. I got my stroke, and then I got my fill over here in my tools panel at the bottom. I will click on that, and then this little arrow that says swap fill and stroke, I'll click that. This fill chip is brought to the front, and now I have a very bright pink flower. And when I'm working on a logo, I always work in black and white first because I want to see and I want to know that it works at very small sizes and that in its very basic form or the basic shape, it works very well. By working in black and white, you remove any of the concern that you have over color. You may have certain things that you like about certain colors and you don't like about others, and you don't want that to influence your thinking. So you're going to come over here and you'll create a black swatch. Now to do that, what I normally do is I double click on the swatch in the swatches panel. If you don't have the swatches panel open, let me show you real quick. If you don't have the swatches panel open, you can go up to Window and down to Swatches. So open your menu bar, Swatches, and that will open up your swatches panel. So we have this pink color. We're going to double click, and now I'm going to select by just holding my mouse down and going down to the corner here all the way down to 0. RGB is all 0. These are all zeros. That is the code and the mix for black. So we're going to hit OK. And now we have just our mark in black and white. So there we go. So I'm going to zoom out and take a look at it. I'm even going to pretend like I'm looking at a very small size. And that's probably about the size of it would be on a postage stamp. Now remember, your computer monitor, the resolution is never going to be as great as when it's actually printed. So you're going to get a lot better reproduction at small sizes when you have something printed. If you have a nice monitor, I'm working on an iMac 2017. It's got a very nice display. Of course, you pay for that display. But if you have a very nice display, it's going to show up nice and sharp here. Everything's going to be really nice and sharp, and that's great. But we do always want to test and just see if it falls apart. So I'm zooming out, zooming in, just taking a look at it. And it looks like it's going to work pretty well. Now this is a dogwood flower, and I've used this in a mark that I'm doing for a hypothetical client called the Dogwood Apartments. We'll look at that in a second. So what I do is after I've done that shape, I will scale it down, and then here's where I've created the Dogwood Garden Apartments. Dogwood Garden Apartments. Got the black and white version. I've added these leaves. I kind of went back and felt like it needed some leaves. It helps it give it a little bit of contrast and interest. And then I've gone ahead and put in a typeface here. This one is Baskerville, I believe. Let's see. Yes, Baskerville. And this one is Avenir. So I have a nice serif typeface with a sans serif for contrast. I felt those worked pretty well, and then the color palette I developed after exploring what it looked like in black and white. I went in and created this color palette. So we have a pink dogwood blossom, the leaves, and if you look at a dogwood, some of them have an interior that has green, some of them have yellow, but I went ahead and went with green. And that's what it looks like. That's how we got to create our vector shape. We made some decisions about it and reduced it down and incorporated it with text for a logo. So now we have a very nice, simple, scalable logo. Because it's a vector graphic, we can now scale it to something very small or very large as needed.